Hello, we are giving a team presentation on how to write a good conclusion. Those presenting today are myself, Megan Haynes, Ty Mills, Shenda Coy, Gabriel Jones, and Jackson Karwoski. We are presenting this information to you based off our knowledge from Western Michigan University's public speaking class. A little introduction to conclusions. The conclusions can sometimes be the hardest part of your speech. So much is at stake when writing that final paragraph. A conclusion is a form of ending the speech, but not closing it off indefinitely. To rephrase, the conclusion should leave no debate what the speaker's purpose was, but allow for discussion afterwards. The purpose of a conclusion is to signal the end of the speech, but also reinforce the central idea. Now, there are several ways of doing this, but there are also many ways you could botch it up and add confusion for the audience. Our purpose for this presentation is to inform your forensics team on the characteristics of giving a good speech and also writing one. It's important for you guys to know this because as a forensics club, you may have to give a speech with a conclusion in it. And a sloppy conclusion won't help you win your competition. We'll be going over what you should be done at conclusion, as well as some things to avoid.
I'm going to be talking about signaling the end of the speech. The best way to do that is with brief cues that you're getting ready to stop. In the beginning, such as, in conclusion, my purpose has been, let me end by saying, something along those lines to really let your audience know that the conclusion's starting and that the speech is coming to an end. One of the best ways to do it is the crescendo method. And that's a method where it's a conclusion in which it builds in intensity through many characteristics. The characteristics are pitch, such as your tone of voice, how you want to go about it. The second's word choice, whether being you want to use very complicated, very simplistic, depending on how your speech is. And the third is gestures, really things that really signal to the audience that your speech is coming to an end. And the third is loudness, really how loud you want to be. Did you notice I raised my volume right there as to just give you a quick example? And one of the best examples through history has been Martin Luther King's speech that I have been to the mountaintop, or even the battle hymn of the Republic, as stated in our book. The other method is the dissolving ending method. And that's a conclusion that generates emotional appeal by fading step by step to a dramatic final statement. And those are the best ways to signal the end of the speech.
As stated, reinforcing the central idea is pivotal. There are several great techniques to use when you want to enforce the central idea in your conclusion. One thing you may want to consider trying is referring back to both the central idea and the main points. Now, I don't mean to repeat your introduction or your main points word for word, but rather you do want to make references to and restate your thesis along with all of your main points. Do not drone on about them. Keep it short and succinct. Another thought is to include or end with a quote. The quote must be relevant to the topic at hand and should not be a long, wordy quote, but rather something short but fitting that keeps the focus of your audience on the topic, as well as supporting the points made previously. One final trick, per se, is to end your conclusion with a brief yet dramatic statement, one that focuses the audience to want to take some sort of action. Now, whether that action be to just engage in a conversation or think about what you have said or really jump in and take some sort of action, any of those things will do. To quote the website Oxbridge Essays, best of all, though, is if you leave them with a feeling of excitement. Excitement that your essay or speech promises a new way of thinking about a topic or a promising line of intellectual inquiry. Restating your point for the speech will give the audience a sense of closure and final understanding of the speaker's purpose. But as an inexperienced speaker, there are many errors that can be made without proper warning.
Hello everyone, my name is Ty Mills and I will be talking about what to look out for when ending a speech. When writing a good conclusion, there are some things you will definitely want to avoid, such as ending too abruptly, making the conclusion too long, and ending the speech without confidence. Within this speech, I will teach you the methods of how to make a good conclusion, along with some examples of do's and don'ts. With ending too abruptly, it is important to make sure that your speech doesn't end too abruptly, as it will leave the audience puzzled and unfulfilled. You want to give the audience some indicators that your speech will be ending soon. An example of properly concluding your speech would be, let me conclude by saying blank, or in conclusion blank. A technique to not ending too abruptly would be reinforce the central idea of the speech and to tie in those final thoughts, summarizing what your speech was about briefly and with some creativity in a concluding manner. The conclusion is a very important part of your speech, so take your time, allow those thoughts to flow freely, and keep yourself at a good pace so you don't run out of words to say. Another thing to avoid will be ending the speech without confidence. Check your posture, maintain that eye contact, and control your vocal pitch. It is important to make sure that all these things are in line so that your audience is aware that you have some confidence in what you're talking about. As Business Insider wrote in an article about how to conclude with confidence, one thing that the author wrote was, quote, speak up. Just as it can be distressing to watch someone struggle through a presentation, it can also be positively inspiring to watch someone nail one. Remember that words you use can be effective and meaningful, but the real strength lies in their delivery, end quote. So keep in mind that the more prepared you are for your speech, the better your speech will be and the more confidence you will have. Lastly, I will talk about making the conclusion too long. Throughout their entire speech, it is important to keep the audience entertained. This means maybe using a little bit of humor, connecting to the audience by telling a story if you're giving an informative speech, and not using jargon. Making the conclusion too long is one thing you'll want to stay away from, as instead of the audience members paying attention to your content, it makes it so they're focusing on when your speech is going to be ending. So one particular thing that stood out to me in the art of public speaking was the dissolve ending. So the dissolve ending is an ending that consists of a conclusion that generates an emotional appeal by fading step by step to a dramatical final statement. Not only does the ending tie into a conclusion that is not too long, but it also gets the emotion and the attention of the audience. So now you have finally gotten a crash course of writing a good conclusion. Hopefully you are well informed of the don'ts and do's when writing a good conclusion. Be sure not to end too abruptly, conclude with confidence, and to make sure your conclusion is not too long and drawn out. So, I will conclude my presentation by asking you a question. How will you tie into the central idea of your speech and end conflict with a bang? Thank you.
It has been our purpose to try and inform you about how to deliver the best possible conclusion to a speech that you can. We have done our best to explain to you how to signal to the audience that the end of your speech is coming, how to reinforce the central idea of your speech, and what are some things that are best to avoid while giving your conclusion. Conclusions can be sought as an afterthought sometimes, with some people thinking that the body or the introduction is more important than the conclusion. However, after this presentation, we hope you understand now that this is far from the truth. As a great American poet, Henry Longfellow once said, "Great is the art of the beginning, but the greater art is the one of the end." Thank you. Here are some potential questions from the audience members. How can you tell if a quote that you have found is appropriate. As said in the speech, when looking for a potential ending quote, make sure that it's appropriate by making sure it's relatable to the audience and the topic at hand, making sure it's not too long, and making sure it's not offensive so no one in the audience gets angry or mad. Should you have your conclusion memorized? No, it doesn't have to be. However, if you feel more comfortable doing it, that is completely up to you. However, it is not necessary. If you work it out in detail and practice it, you can deliver it with different wording as long as the main point gets across. Thank you.